Two couples were made especially happy the same year when children were born into their homes. Roy and Venice Thurman gave birth to their first child in Tampa, Florida, and named their daughter Catherine Camille. Meanwhile, John and Pauline Gilley welcomed their fourth child in Dallas, Texas, naming their son James William. Camille grew up in Florida, Alabama, and Arkansas, as her father pastored churches in those states. Jim, on the other hand, grew up in Texas, in and around the city of Tyler, moving back to Dallas when he was a teenager. During Camille's final year at Ozark Academy, her father took a call to Houston, Texas, prompting her to make the decision to finish her senior year of academy at Southwestern in Keene, Texas. And that's where Jim and Camille met. They were both very popular students, active in school life, and they began dating as freshmen in college. 1 week after their first date, Jim asked Camille to marry him, and she said yes. However, only a few months later, they broke up and did not begin dating again for almost a year. 6 weeks after graduating from Southwestern Junior College, they were married on the 17th of July in the Houston Central Adventist Church. Camille had 3 friends as her attendants and her brother James Earl as an usher. Jim's 3 brothers, Ed, John, and Paul, stood with him as Pastor Thurman performed the wedding. The honeymoon was one night in nearby Galveston, Texas. Jim, who only had a little over $100 when they got married, could not afford more, so the next morning they drove back to Dallas, where he began work on Tuesday. And after 50 years, he's still working. Their first year of marriage was spent teaching public school in Montana, in the ranch country, west of Miles City and off the highway some 24 miles from Cohagen. They attended church at the Garfield County seat in Jordan, Montana, some 35 miles away. Jim had 6 students in his school and Camille had 9 in hers, 4 miles away. The roads were thought to be impassable in the winter snow, but Jim made it back to Camille's school, where they lived in a 13 by 12-foot teacherage with no running water and outdoor bathroom facilities. In other words, an outhouse. They received 3 gallons of water a day, 5 days a week, for all their cooking, drinking, and bathing needs. Bathing was done every Friday evening in a wash tub. Next, they decided to attend the newly named Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, for their final 2 years of college, knowing that would be the location of the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, which Jim would eventually attend. After the school year in Montana, Jim started selling promotional advertising for a small company in Dallas, making sales that more than covered his expenses for tuition. Needing the money to enter school, he called the company for a check. They told him they had financial problems and couldn't pay him. This major setback convinced Jim that very day to start his own promotional advertising firm, and he chose the name Continental Specialty Company. He thought it sounded like a big company, though he ran it from a desk in their laundry room and out of his VW Bug. He developed a number of customers, and one of them was the McKee Baking Company, who had just started their line of Little Debbie snack cakes. One of Jim's first orders with them was for pocket protectors with a color photo of Little Debbie trapped in a clear vinyl trap. This concept was brand new at the time, and he located a supplier in St. Louis, Missouri to manufacture them. His company proved to be a very successful venture, and he did well with the business. In fact, it's still in existence at this time in Berrien Springs. In May of their junior year in college, Jim's dad died of cancer. And the day after the funeral, they left for a summer job they had arranged previously by mail and phone to work for the U.S. Forest Service on Sourdough Mountain in the Nez Perce National Forest. This job on a fire tower allowed them to finish some correspondence courses that they needed for graduation and still earn $1.91 an hour while watching for fires. Saving their money, Jim and Camille were able to return to Andrews University for their senior year of college, graduating with degrees in religion and elementary education, respectively, hoping for a call to the ministry. The couple was very happy when Pastor Merle Mills called them to the Southern New England Conference in Massachusetts. He wanted Jim to postpone his seminary study for 1 year, and being tired of studying, this suited him just fine. Jim was appointed assistant pastor of the South Lancaster Village Church, working with Pastor Russell Adams, who both Jim and Camille liked immediately, and from whom Jim learned so much, and also planted a church in nearby Leominster after he conducted an evangelistic meeting. Camille taught elementary school, utilizing her recently earned bachelor's degree in elementary education, so the year passed quickly. Then it was back to Andrews for Jim's seminary training. After a year of intensive theological training, Jim was asked to join Don Jacobson, professor of evangelism, in the summer as a singing evangelist for a camp in Racine, Wisconsin. A fantastic experience, with Camille playing the piano. The couple stayed with the team as they joined Bruce Johnson in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was during this campaign that James William Gilley Jr., still known to this day by his siblings as Jimmy, arrived into the world. No couple could have been more excited. After the Worcester meeting, Jim held one more evangelistic campaign as a song director and visitation coordinator with HMS Richards Jr. in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. And when that campaign finished, Jim, Camille, and Jimmy moved to Connecticut, where Jim was the pastor of the Plainville, Meridian, and Middletown churches. Jim immediately started his ministry in Plainville with an evangelistic series, his fourth full campaign since June 1st. Growth was fantastic that year with Plainville, and the church membership doubled. The other churches were growing at a healthy rate too. Soon, at the suggestion of Pastor Richards, Jim was called by Elder Mills and the committee to be the conference evangelist. At only 25 years of age, he was the youngest Adventist conference evangelist in North America. As they began this work, a new addition to the Gilley family, Mary Ann Catherine, was born. In the next 2.5 years, the Gilleys conducted 25 full-scale evangelistic series in New England with David and Carol Peterson. The Lord blessed immensely, and their third child, John Thurman, was welcomed by the whole family enthusiastically. Jim had often told his church members that they had as much time to do soul winning as he did because of the administrative tasks that a pastor must face. So shortly after John was born, the Lord gave Jim the chance to prove that he could practice what he preached. Jim, Camille, and their 3 children moved to Dallas. Purchasing an established business from its aging founders on credit, Jim obtained Davis & Stanton Advertising. It was a business he enjoyed and felt very natural running. He also was encouraged by his old Bible teacher, M.D. Lewis, and several others to run for political office. So he ran for the U.S. Congress in the 24th District in Texas. Jim lost the race for Congress, but made hundreds of friends and contacts that were invaluable. And the best part was that he was forever cured of the political bug. Shortly after the political campaign, their 4th child, Amy Camille, was born. Her brother Jimmy once said, "Without her, we are a pretty dull family."
Hi, I'm Kelly Summers from the Texas Humane Society. Texas Humane Society is a place where all kinds of retarded children and mental children go. It's a kind of like a school that teaches them, tries to teach them how to eat correctly and talk correctly. Please, everyone, donate money to the Texas Humane Society. You'll get get rewarded by feeling good inside. You will get rewarded by your money.
Jim had now been so involved in business that there was not enough time left for evangelistic ministry. But the Lord soon opened a new door with a business that was also a ministry. Missionary Tape and Equipment Supply was the business of selling sound and video equipment, as well as cassette tapes to churches, schools, and ministries by catalog. The Lord opened the door for him to buy it, and this company became the base from which nearly 50 evangelistic series were conducted with no cost to the conference, and where many hundreds were baptized. In 1983, they moved to Egan near Keene and built a home where they lived for the next 10 years. The children all attended school in Keene, where each of them eventually graduated from Southwestern Adventist University. Camille was a full-time mother, and her children received all of her attention. Many vacations were spent together, and they all look back on these years fondly. After the Lord, the family has always come first for Jim and Camille.
Go, Jimmy! Go, Jimmy, go! Didn't I tell you that? Let's just leave Jimmy open.
But as the children entered academy and were more involved in their school activities, it became more difficult for them to go to evangelistic meetings night after night. Soon, Jim realized that family togetherness was ministry of the first order. So he accepted the invitation to be senior pastor of the Arlington, Texas church with a salary of $1 a year. For the next 7 years, the Lord blessed their ministry abundantly, and the church grew from under 300 members to over 1,000. An opportunity to sell missionary tape to Cam Audio came, and Jim joined Coleman Stewart with L.H. Coleman as a partner and vice president. His new position allowed him to have more time for pastoral ministry, as well as being able to consult with other Adventist churches concerning stewardship. Jim's mother died unexpectedly with a stroke. Amy left for school at Monterey Bay Academy, and Jim began a new position with Coleman all the same month. Major changes sometimes come quickly. Shortly after, the call came to go to the Ukraine for evangelistic meetings. Communism was still in power, and Dnipropetrovsk was the spot the General Conference chose for Jim and Camille, as well as Max and Betty Trevino, to minister. None of them had heard of the city of 2.5 million people, but this became the first of 8 major evangelistic series in the Ukraine, in the cities of Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Kharkov, and Kiev. Over 10,000 people were baptized into God's remnant church, and at least 26 new churches were organized. John and Amy joined the first Odessa meeting during Christmas, and John organized the Boys from America and returned the next summer baptizing nearly 100 people. Kirk and Marianne were part of the team in Kharkov, and Kirk simultaneously conducted a video campaign in Mariva that resulted in 50 baptisms. The Arkansas-Louisiana Conference was the next stop, as Jim was surprised by being elected as conference president. After a very rocky beginning with the conference committee, things smoothed out, and the next 7 years were some of the most fruitful ministry he and Camille have ever enjoyed. The ministers and staff truly joined with the membership to make their stay in Arkansas, Louisiana beautiful. Then came a day they will never forget. It was January 5, 2001. And their next-door neighbor accidentally started a minor fire which was easily extinguished by the fire department. He was taken to the hospital, but no fireman stayed on. So the fire quickly rekindled itself, and this time not only wiped out that townhouse, but also the Gilley's home and the townhouse next door. When Don Schneider called Jim shortly afterwards to be vice president of the North American Division, Jim kiddingly told him that it would be a cheap move since the fire had wiped them out. Their 5 years at the North American Division were wonderful. Working with Don Schneider and staff was a pleasure, but the travel was extensive. When the Texas Conference asked Jim to come back to his old home church as pastor, after much prayer, they accepted. Dallas became the couple's home for the next 2 years, and the attendance increased dramatically. Jim and Camille honestly thought they would be there until the Lord's return. One reason was because Amy was living there, Then Amy met Ethan Bierman. They were married and moved away from Dallas. This made it a little easier when the call from Danny Shelton and the 3ABN board came out of the blue to come to that ministry as their president. There were a number of indicators that the Lord was in this call, and soon Jim and Camille were convinced that this was where the Lord wanted them. They have never had any doubts that this was true. Jim, seeing that all of the ministry and business experience of the past had uniquely prepared him for this difficult yet rewarding position. So for almost 8 years, they continued at 3ABN in Illinois, Jim serving as president, CEO, and eventually chairman of the board of this wonderful organization, enjoying immensely the work of sending the gospel of the three angels' messages around the world, with a talented and dedicated team at 3ABN. Jim and Camille had planned to scale back after the 2015 General Conference, when Jim would announce his retirement. It was so fitting that the last regular program was a Nightlight presentation with his friend and ministry partner, C.A. Murray. Nightlight was a series conceived together, Jim and C.A., 5 years earlier in 2010 at the Atlanta, Georgia GC session, where they broadcast live from a hill high above the Georgia Dome, dubbed the Grassy Knoll by the crew. Jim continues speaking by invitation around the country and places like Trinidad and Tobago, as well as regularly speaking at the Celebration Adventist Hospital Church in Florida. He and Camille now make Claremont near Orlando as their home. They continue to lead annual trips to Israel, and Jim has recently had 2 new books released by Pacific Press. Jim Jr., wife Maggie, and daughter Abigail reside in Palatka, Florida. Jimmy III lives in Winter Garden and daughter Chloe in Washington State. Marianne and Kirk, with daughters Camille, Venice, and Carrie live in Weimar, California. Daughter Katie and husband Taylor also live in Weimar. They lost Ben in a tragic pickup accident as he drove to work on November of 2017. John, Jerica, John Wesley, and Jack live in Napa, California. Amy, Ethan, Levi James, and Shiloh live in Beverly Hills, California. So that's the story. On July 17, 2020, Jim and Camille marked their 60th wedding anniversary. They thank God for His leading them together and His leading in their lives. To God be the glory. They hope to keep on keeping on with Jesus until He returns.